Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means Epic Comic Book Wednesday, where Michael K Vaughan and I combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have squandered our youths. It started out as a feature on Michael's channel, where he was going through Marvel's Epic collection, their paperback line of full-color reprint volumes. I liked the cut of its jibs, so I elbowed my way in. and now we talk about not only Epic collections, but comics of all kinds. And the price I paid for the rudeness of elbowing my way in is that Michael is the one picking what we talk about. I'm not setting the agenda. He's setting the agenda, which can sometimes yield very positive results. There are titles and comics and superhero concepts on which he shows good taste. In other words, taste that precisely coincides with my own. But sometimes not. And even when he doesn't particularly like the thing that is next on his mind to talk about, he still feels the need to talk about it. We need to hash these things out. And this week is one of the weeks where the thing he picks is terrible. And this is not one of the weeks where we disagree and he thinks it's great. He also largely deplores it. He's just nicer than I am. I'll leave a link to his video down below. But in order to get the full context of what we're talking about today, we need to go back to the year 1986, which was a year replete with tragedies. There was the Chernobyl disaster, which I remember reading the first tremors about it in the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald and the New York Times. And I remember looking at those things and thinking, this could be really bad. There's a good chance that this is a lot worse than the Russians are saying. And that turned out to be true. It turned out to be much worse than what they were saying. It was also the year of the Challenger disaster, which I not only read about, but watched while it happened. Being a NASA geek, I watched in a sparsely populated room on live TV as the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. And one of those sparsely populated people in the room was one of those diehard, we could be sending this money to the inner cities. She was anger watching the whole thing. And when the Challenger exploded, she angrily said, into a room that was completely silent with shock, she angrily said, I can't wait until we get these people in front of an inquiry and find out what they did wrong. And I guess everybody was wondering what I would say. I maybe had a reputation even then for being outspoken. I turned to her and said, their spacecraft just exploded in low Earth orbit. They're not going to be present at any inquiry that happens. And there were other tragedies in 1986. For instance, the Boston Red Sox lost the World Series to the New York Mets in a series of games that forever inscribed the name of Bill Buckner in the halls of infamy. And in addition to that list of tragedies, there was one other, and that was the book that Michael has picked for today, and that is John Byrne's reinvention of Superman. Superman, the Man of Steel. This was originally a 6-issue miniseries in the wake of DC's mega continuity revamp, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which Michael and I will get to. We will get to it. Many sins can be laid at the door of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Crisis was designed to simplify DC continuity, which had grown big and varied over 60 years because a million different writers and artists had been involved in it. And each one of them had outdone themselves for creativity. Some good, some bad. Quite a bit good. DC decided to scrap all of that and make one unified timeline, not seeming to think that could only make things more complicated, not less, and that all of it would have to be redone, because that's not the way things work. That's not the way creativity works, or honoring the creatives who came before you, I might say. That certainly comes to the fore when we're talking about Superman, Man of Steel, because in the wake of Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC Comics got fan-favorite artist and writer John Byrne, who'd been hot from Marvel Comics that he'd been drawing, to do Superman, to redo Superman. All Superman titles were stopped, and for a while the only Superman that you could read was Man of Steel in a 6-issue miniseries, one issue after another, setting the template and the new beginning technology for Superman, reinventing the character from scratch. I was apoplectic when it was even announced. John Byrne did not create Superman. Joe Siegel and Jerry Souster created Superman. John Byrne did not create any of the great imaginative architecture of Superman. Mort Weisinger and Julie Schwartz did that. And a whole bunch of other writers. And a whole bunch of artists as well. He didn't do any of that. And also, when a character is Superman, we're not talking about, damage here. We're talking about, I shouldn't say damage, I'll give Michael ideas. We're not talking about that. We're talking about Superman, who is a cultural phenomenon. He's a cultural figure. So, in a sense, even DC Comics, which owns the rights to the character, is only curating him for the future. You don't have the right to do whatever you want with a character who achieves the cultural significance of something like Superman. Any more, I might add, to Alex Kurtzman and Akiva Goldsman than you have the right to rewrite Star Trek. You don't have the right to do that. You can tell interesting, creative, innovative stories, but you don't get to take a sledgehammer to load-bearing columns. And DC Comics told John Byrne, you can do that. Here's this character and his 70-year mythos. You can change it. Change anything you like. You have to submit your preliminary ideas to us, and we'll okay as much as we can. But pretty much everything is on the table. Now, John Byrne had a few ideas that didn't go through, one of which infamously was that there would be 2 survivors of the planet Krypton. That Jor-El, the scientist on the planet Krypton, who insists to the Science Council that planet Krypton is doomed, that it is going to explode, and that they need to act, they need to observe his warnings, and build a fleet of space arcs to get the planet's population safely away from the planet. Science Council doesn't listen in complacency. It's a great analogy for climate crisis in America today, in the world today. But do writers write it that way? No. But anyway, in the original version that John Byrne wrote, Jor-El, the scientist, puts his baby, Kal-El, who would grow up to be Superman, into the rocket ship with Lara, his wife, and they both go to Earth. So Superman grows up, I guess, with her and without the Kents, and becomes the world's most famous superhero. Well, I guess she opens, Mama Lara's Taste of Krypton delicatessen in Little Italy. I have no idea what she would do. DC shot that down, of course, because the whole idea, one of the big ideas of Crisis on Infinite Earths was to return Superman to being the only survivor of the planet Krypton. Hence, Crisis on Infinite Earths decision, done over too many beers in a bar that's still standing, to kill Supergirl. just kill her. So she's not invulnerable anymore, I guess. You can just kill her. So that Superman goes back to being the sole survivor. Of course, that still leaves thousands of survivors everywhere. There are all kinds of survivors. Monsters, scientists, mutated people, an entire city of Kandor. All that was swept away in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So that idea of John Byrne's was shot down, but precious little else was. And so he was given a green light in a 6-issue miniseries to completely vandalize a character that had been lovingly crafted for longer than he'd been alive. An absolute travesty. An absolute travesty. Now, I had friends at the time who said to me, well, why are you so incensed so preemptively? What if it's good? And I told them, there isn't, on a fundamental level, there isn't any way that it could be good, no matter how well executed it is, because the idea is blasphemous. It's like you're saying, well, the Nazis take over France, and they take over the Louvre, and Himmler decides, well, I would like to throw buckets of turpentine on the Mona Lisa and paint a version of the Mona Lisa myself. No one in that circumstance would ask, well, shouldn't we wait to see if his Mona Lisa is any good? The idea is blasphemous on its own before you see any execution. Now, about the execution, just a side note here. I have never been a fan of John Byrne's writing. It's terrible. I think even Michael acknowledges that. But I've also never been all that much a fan of his artwork. His paneling is lazy. His action sequences are usually very bad and seem photoshopped. He doesn't tend to want to do backgrounds. Usually he's either indulged where his comic book sequences don't have any backgrounds, or the company has to pay somebody to do the backgrounds and the finished work for him because he's not bothering to do that anymore. And you only have to look at his work on some title that he shares with another artist to see that. For instance, he made his bones on Marvel's X-Men. That's what made him such a hot property that DC thought he was poachable. that he could finally goose the sales of Superman. And if all you have to do to see the weaknesses in the structure of his artwork is to compare it to Dave Cockrum, the artist who was right immediately before him on the all-new, all-different Uncanny X-Men, who is a terrific artist. All you have to do is compare the two of them to see that. There's a lot of hype involved. I'm not sure if it has something to do with the fact that he guided a lot of comic book fans through their adolescence. Either way, when it comes to the execution is terrible in this 6-issue miniseries. It's terrible. The artwork is awful. The panel work is absolutely lazy. And in addition to that, DC Comics had to know they were putting a lot on the line with this miniseries. This is their flagship character, and not only that, but the flagship superhero of all time. And what do? They give John Byrne a lazy inker. Dick Giordano is a lazy inker. And it shows. In the issues, it shows. The issues that he inks tend to just fall off a cliff. It's not just that, of course. It's also the stuff in the issues, which was roundly roasted by the comic book commentariat of the day. Now, in his own video, Michael he doesn't remember the details because he's really old, but he references a long, long takedown that was done in a great old industry journal called Amazing Heroes. I am extremely familiar with that takedown. Know it like the back of my hand. And it was being gentle. There's a lot worse criticism that you could make of this wretched, wretched series, which starts off with the planet Krypton. Only it's not a valiant Jor-El fighting with the Science Council to save his planet, a doomed voice crying out in the wilderness and then talking to his lovely and compassionate wife who's desperately afraid of sending their child off into the wilds of space. No, instead, John Byrne gives us a sterile ice planet that he lifts completely from the Salkind brothers' Superman the Motion Picture, Superman the Movie. A dead ice world full of cold, emotionless beings. In other words, John Byrne gives us a Krypton that deserved to die, which takes away a gigantic pillar of the drama that underpinned Superman as its sole survivor. One of the only things Superman can't do in the great Julie Schwartz era is change history. He can't bring Krypton back. And it makes him sad, as you would think. Knowing that he is the sole survivor of the planet Krypton makes him sad, especially since Earth's lower gravity and energizing sunlight gives him super memory, so he can remember Krypton as a baby. And he's gone back to it in time many, many times. So he knows what it was like. John Byrne removes that completely. All of the mythology that had been doled out about the planet Krypton removes it completely. Instead, it's a cold, emotionless planet in which Superman's own mother is revolted at the idea of touching someone's flesh and is not going to give birth to him herself. He is in a birthing matrix. That's another key difference. When Krypton explodes, it's not a rocket ship carrying the infant baby Kal-El to Earth. Instead, it's a birthing matrix. Kal-El has not yet been born. He's not being born from his mother. A birthing matrix sends him to Earth. And when he lands on Earth, he's born out of that birthing matrix and found by the Kents. Jonathan and Martha Kent in Kansas, in Smallville, who decide to pass him off as their own child. So none of this adoption business. Instead, they take him home, and just as they bring him home, a monstrous snowstorm clamps down on the state of Texas, the worst snowstorm anyone's seen in a generation. And when it blows over, they roll into town with a baby. Because, Kansas is famous for its 10-month-long snowstorms. No one seems to question it. The Kents live on a farm. They live in a community. Presumably, there are people over all the time. Presumably, the baby plays in the yard. Presumably, there are play dates or babysitters. None of those people seem to notice that little Kal-El never gets dirty. That when he dribbles chocolate or sauce onto his bib, it sticks to the bib. But when he dribbles it onto himself, it doesn't. Because another one of the changes that John Byrne made to the character is that Superman is not actually invulnerable. Instead, he has some sort of weird low-grade force field that his body emits to a very limited extent all around him, like a little atmosphere. So we don't know whether or not his skin is tougher than a normal person's skin. We just know that with that field up, he's invulnerable. And it also means that no dirt or damage can happen to any clothing that he's wearing. And we're told in the first issue of Superman Man of Steel that that field is in operation pretty early, when Clark is just a toddler. That field is strong enough to protect him from a rampaging bull. And by the time he gets to be the star quarterback on his high school football team, how many practices is that? How many games is that, home and away? How many times is that all of his teammates could have seen that no dirt is clinging to him? We're never told that Superman can control that field. It's on all the time. It's John Byrne's way of getting around how you have a Superman costume that doesn't get destroyed when people pepper him with bullets or lasers. The original explanation for that, created by Julius Schwartz, was that Superman, Superboy, and his parents worked together to craft a costume out of the indestructible and infinitely stretchable blankets that had accompanied the baby to Earth. Fairly dumb explanation, but a lot better than the one that John Byrne replaced it with. John Byrne was given permission to do all of that. And one of the big reasons, maybe this is why I was so incensed, one of the big reasons why Superboy doesn't help his parents to forge a costume for himself is because there is no Superboy. John Byrne decided to do away with that character. Clark Kent doesn't become Superman until he leaves the Kent farm to go to Metropolis as a grown man. Till then, as a teenager, he's just, I guess, a wonder. His teenage friends know that if they're at the drive-in and somebody spills their tray and the ketchup goes flying, well, it's not going to hit Clark. Or if it does, it's going to hang there an inch off his shirt. Nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to notice. John Byrne doesn't think about it. He also doesn't think about what would happen if you had a character like a superpowered Kryptonian playing football. There is never any explanation given for why Clark feels like he needs to hide anything. There's never any convincing explanation given for why he would grow up unmolested by the government, unouted by any of the people in Smallville. Instead, John Byrne is just writing it out of his tuchus, not giving any care. This is a first draft that we're reading. But Superboy's gone. Superdog is gone. The Legion of Superheroes, therefore, retroactively, bam, is gone. They don't have Superboy anymore. I read that first issue and I thought how incredibly wearying this is. Because since this is all so dumb, all John Byrne is doing is turning Superman into Amazing Man, the latest Marvel superhero. That's all he's doing, is turning Superman into a Marvel superhero. And I thought how wearying this is, because all of this is going to have to be changed back. All of it is. But who knows how long it'll take, and who knows what a crappy job will be done turning it back. It'll take a long... I actually wondered at the time when I was reading that first issue, will I live long enough to see this all reversed? It will be. It absolutely will be. Krypton will go back to being a heroic, doomed world. Superboy will be introduced again. Superdog will be introduced again. All kinds of things like that will come back. But no. I did live long enough to see most of it reversed, but it shouldn't have been reversed in the way that it was. There was a spike in sales when this whole thing happened. And once that spike died back down to relatively normal levels, DC should have retconned the hell out of this and said it never happened. That it was an Elseworlds, that it was another dimension, something like that. This was, unbeknownst to me, the first slight touch of the retcon fever that would strike in full force in 2021, where vandals were given control of properties to do with as they please when they should have been only caretakers. That has happened in pretty much any science fiction or pop culture property that you can think of. Pretty much any one that you could name, that has happened with. And this was the first taste of it for me. I was utterly outraged because they started with my favorite superhero. The artwork is awful throughout. Just simple, telegraphic, and I want to say derivative. You would think, if you were John Byrne, if you were anybody, you would think that if DC Comics came to you and said, we're giving you permission to redo the most famous superhero of all time from the ground up, you would think you would bring your A game, and that it would be there in every issue. But there is more John Byrne A game in Batman's cameo appearance in one issue of Man of Steel than there is in any of the rest of this. And a large part of that is because John Byrne is trying to create a Marvel superhero. And one of the things you have to do if you create a Marvel superhero is you have to power the hero down. The hero has to be less powerful. The standard phrase from Forever and Ever Ago is that Marvel superheroes are humans trying to be gods, and DC superheroes are gods trying to be human. That cuts a lot of corners, but I largely agree with it, and that John Byrne throws it right out the window. He has to have a depowered Superman. A wide array of powers, but he's not infinitely strong, he's not infinitely fast, he's not invulnerable. He has that weird shield around his body, but not famously around his cape. So in the John Byrne run of Superman, he's forever shredding capes. And in the course of all of that, there has to be a tortured origin story. Right? Marvel Comics superheroes all have tortured origin stories. Superman famously does not. The real Superman, the canonical Superman, famously does not. He becomes a wholesome, well-adjusted, law and order abiding teenage superhero under the guidance of his parents, the good and true, moral John and Martha Kent, who teach him about his superpowers, teach him how to use them, teach him how to be responsible and respectful. Superboy has to do his homework. He has to do chores at the Kent General Store. They keep him in line. They raise him as a good kid. They raise him with a bedrock solid Midwestern sense of right and wrong, of respect for other people, of a sense of duty that comes from his enormous abilities. It doesn't require that anybody die. It doesn't require that enough people have died already. A whole planet has died already. It doesn't require Uncle Ben getting shot or anything like that. It doesn't require that Superboy is ever healed. He's just raised right. That's all. There's no besetting trauma. The besetting trauma is that he's the sole survivor of a dead planet. Other than that, no. There's no traumatic origin story. But in John Byrne's version, there is. Oh, they're on many, many levels. There are traumatic origin stories. For instance, the Kents lie to their son until he's 18. I don't know what lies they tell him. John Byrne never bothers to tell us. Instead, they just lie to him about, where his powers came from. He had to have asked. He had to have wanted to know. Who knows what lies they told him, but they certainly don't tell him they have a spaceship in the back barn. They don't tell him that until they do. They don't tell him that until they do. There's an infamous scene where Jonathan and young Clark pull up at the farmhouse, and Martha Kent is there, and she says, "You told him?" And Jonathan Kent says, "I told him." And Clark Kent says, "He told me." It makes about as much sense as a strapping 18-year-old Clark Kent learning that he can fly because his dog pushes him over. There's no super dog anymore. It's just an ordinary dog. We know already that a truck couldn't push him over, but the dog does. To avoid falling into a ditch, which of course wouldn't hurt him, he flies. And he crashes into a barn, and he digs a furrow in the earth until finally Pa Kent can help him to master the art of flying. No, he just knows how to fly right away. Perfect as could be. Never tried it before in his life. The story moves on to Metropolis. Clark Kent wants to go to Metropolis. He invents a disguise for himself. He kisses his mother on the forehead, and off he goes to Metropolis, where he encounters Lex Luthor and Lois Lane. Lex Luthor is an evil billionaire who values his ironclad control over Metropolis and very much resents this alien who's come here to suddenly be the top dog. And apparently that's a motivation for all that Lex Luthor does. It's a dumb motivation. I'm not saying that it's dumber than his original motivation, which is that when they were both teenagers in Smallville, a lab accident that Lex Luthor mistakenly attributes to Superboy causes all his hair to fall out. And that was a pretty dumb motivation story anyway. It isn't any improved by this. There are all kinds of better motivation stories. Lex Luthor is a character that's difficult to nail. I would argue he's as difficult to nail a character as Superman himself is. More writers have got this character wrong than have got him right. John Byrne gets him epically wrong. Why does Superman do any of the things that he does? And why does John Byrne insist over and over again in making him a fascist creep? I have my suspicions. I have an idea why that is. We've already talked about Batman Dark Knight Returns on this channel. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the Batman in Man of Steel, in the one issue where he appears, is far more interesting a character than the Superman in the 6 issues that he appears. But we get those 6 issues, and they are bland, and they are boring, and they have occasional wide angles of Superman soaring or whatnot, and it's all pretty bad. It's all really, really bad. And you get to the end of the miniseries, and you know that more is coming, and that it's going to be, if anything, worse. And it's going to launch some Superman titles, one of which will be done by John Byrne. Two, actually, because Superman gets a team-up book. But John Byrne writes and draws one of the revamped and restarted Superman series. Fortunately, the only bright light here is that one of the other series, The Adventures of Superman, is drawn by Jerry Ordway, who is a really good comic book artist. He's not cut out for superhero comics as far as I'm concerned, although he has done some great work. He did a run on The Avengers that is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And his work on Superman, The Adventures of Superman, is pretty good too. I'm sure that there's a gigantic hardcover omnibus of that run, or maybe I'm wrong. Michael's always complaining about how bad a job DC does with its reprint culture, and he's absolutely right about that. Maybe there isn't a big $120 omnibus of The Adventures of Superman, but I would love to read a run of just that, of just Jerry Ordway on that title. And if it exists, I'm sure that Michael has it. But that doesn't save the Man of Steel. Nothing can save the Man of Steel. This miniseries was a desecration. It impoverished and pauperized a rich creative tradition, and it did so with a completely cavalier lack of interest in the huge amount of creativity that had gone before it. John Byrne jettisons all of it in favor of his own dumb, threadbare ideas. And it took the Superman mythos, the Superman comic book world, a long time to recover from this desecration. A long time. Until we get a Superman who is much, much more powerful, 500 times more powerful than what? Luke Cage Power Man with a cape in The Man of Steel. Until we get a truly villainous Lex Luthor. Until we get a better setup of the Daily Planet. Jimmy Olsen can't be an 8-year-old. Until we get a better Krypton. Until we get a better Rogues Gallery, better envisionments of them, a better Superman than a character who's a collection of one dumb idea of another, of one substandard writer. Why is it that people don't have clear pictures of Superman? Well, because he's vibrating his head every time he sees a photographer nearby. And yet no one asks him, hey, why are you vibrating your head? And as if that's how photography works. And so on and so forth. So I was glad to get this off my chest. This is a terrible, terrible, one might even say crappy miniseries. It is a desecration that DC should have retconned. It's not good enough to just piecemeal bring back the things that John Byrne destroyed. You have to retcon it. You have to say it never happened. Same thing with the Jodie Whittaker Doctor Who. Same thing with Star Trek Discovery. It's not enough just to move on. You have to retcon what you did, what you allowed to happen wrong, if what you allowed to happen wrong desecrates the property that you were given control over. If you do something that's ill-advised, Superman with a long hair in the back, Superman red, Superman blue, if you do something like that, okay, then it's a story that we can all look back on. But if you desecrate the character and then say this is the new reality, that needs to be retconned. It's not enough. I don't want it to be true that any of the dumb adventures in this miniseries ever actually happened the way they've happened. And slowly but surely that has happened. The meeting in issue number 4 of Man of Steel is no longer the first time Superman and Batman met, I don't think, canonically, in current DC continuity. I don't think this is the first time that Superman and Lex Luthor met. I don't think this is the way that Superman met Lois Lane, telling her a line that fans hated right from the beginning, where he's flying her to her home, and she says, how do you know where I live? And he says, I know where everyone lives, Miss Lane. Yeah, that's a hero. That's definitely somebody that we want to look up to. Anyway, I could go on, but I won't. Instead, I'll stop right here, and I will hope that Michael K Vaughan picks something less rage-inducing next week. And I will leave a link to his video down below if you want a more temperate, more balanced version of this. And I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.